today's World Insight. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit convenes in Tajikistan. Can they find a common solution to the crisis next door in Afghanistan? And the end of China's first mission to its space station coincides with SpaceX's first all-civilian flight. Can China and the U.S. cooperate in space exploration? Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and this is World Insight. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Heads of State meeting is taking place in Tajikistan's capital, Dushanbe. The organization is an 8-member regional security alliance, which includes China, Russia, India, Pakistan, and 4 Central Asian countries. This year, the SCO marks its 20th anniversary. Developments in Afghanistan top the agenda. Earlier today, Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed a meeting of the SCO through video link. President Xi from China said China will continue to provide vaccines to the world and urged the organization to take tough action against the terrorism. On the situation in Afghanistan, Xi Jinping said the SCO should play a positive role in facilitating peace in that country. Let's listen in.
Afghanistan has undergone drastic changes. The withdrawal of foreign troops has opened a new page in its history, but Afghanistan still faces many daunting challenges, and it needs the support and assistance of the international community, particularly countries in our region. We SCO member states need to step up coordination, make full use of platforms such as the SCO Afghanistan Contact Group, and facilitate a smooth transition in Afghanistan.
And now, I'm joined by a panel made of people coming from 3, at least, of the SCO countries. In Moscow, Dmitry Barbish from the Sputnik International News Agency. In New Delhi, Madhav Nalapat from the Manipal University. Last but not least, in China, Rong Ying from the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start about the latest situation in Afghanistan and how the leaders at the SCO meetings were talking about this. Mr. Rong from China, according to the Chinese president, it is very important to have an inclusive political arrangement inside Afghanistan. How is China and some of the other SCO countries can help and support that process? Briefly.
Well, I think it has been very clear that this inclusivity for all the political parties in Afghanistan, including the Taliban, after it's taken over, has become a very important sort of issue, convergent issues for the region and for the international community. I think it has been repeatedly pointed out, and more importantly, it seems that the initial impression by the so-called interim government put forward by the Taliban is not sort of satisfactory. But in the meantime, I think China made it very clear we have to take a pragmatic and reasonable sort of approach by continuing to encourage the Taliban and other political forces to form an inclusive political framework.
Mr. Barbish from Russia. Russia already have very clear attitude toward the issue of Afghanistan. I hope you will be able to hear me. Can you hear me, sir, Mr. Barbish? It seems that we're having some difficulties. Mr. Nalapat, let me go to you in India. Now, India plays an interesting role, and there are different issues that India has with different factions in Afghanistan. Tell me more about how do you, from New Delhi's perspective, see that inclusiveness that's needed in the government?
Well, I would like to say that President Xi is perfectly right, that it should be an inclusive government, and that means that there should be a fair representation of Tajiks, of Uzbeks, of Hazara, the Shia minority there, and also religious minorities, if the few that are left in Afghanistan. It's very important to ensure that. And secondly, I would say it's very important to ensure education rather than spending money on guns and weapons. I think money should be spent on schools and hospitals, especially education of women and modern education. Unless you teach them modern life.
But Mr. Nalapad, let me just focus. We have a lot of issues about Afghanistan. We cannot just make them all at the same time. Let me just ask you about that inclusive government. About that, what is some of the perspectives that you have?
Well, our perspective in India is that we have never been friendly with the Taliban. In 1996, you'll remember, when President Clinton of the United States basically ensured that the Taliban would take over power in Kabul, the way President Biden has just last month, India was not at all happy. And the reason is that India wants an inclusive Afghanistan. And the Taliban represented one section of the Pashtun community. What I have seen in this current government, this so-called interim government, it's more of the same. Where is the Tajik representation, the Uzbek representation, the Hazara representation, and above all, the overwhelming majority of Pashtuns who are moderate?
I see.
I think it's very important that all countries with an interest in fighting terrorism, China and India in particular, should ensure that the promise of the Taliban should be kept.
About terrorism, that's another issue. We're going to come back to that. Let me just focus on the government for now. Mr. Barbish from Russia, tell me more. Russia has already taken a pragmatic, but at the same time, cautious approach toward the Taliban interim government, quote unquote. Tell me more about that inclusive government. Chinese President Xi Jinping once again repeated in his speech toward the Afghan issue at the SCO summit. What is the approach of Russia?
Well, I think basically the approaches of China and Russia are very similar. Just like China, Russia wants the Afghan government to represent all the people of Afghanistan, different groups representing different opinions existing inside that society. But certainly Russia is very concerned about terrorist activity that could spill over from Afghanistan. Let me tell you that Taliban is still officially a terrorist organization in Russia. Whenever you mention Taliban, the word Taliban on Russian television or radio, you have to add the word terrorist organization. So morally, our attitude to Taliban is negative. But we understand that the government that is going to be acting from Kabul includes Taliban members, and we have to deal with this government in the interest of our people and in the interest of the people of Afghanistan. So, I mean, we used to deal with some very morally unsavory characters in the past, and this is nothing new for us.
All right.
So I think Russia will have embassy in Kabul. We will try to create a more or less pragmatic relationship with Afghanistan, but we will be very tough on any attempt by Taliban or any other organization acting in Afghanistan to carry their terrorist activity to other countries, especially we will be negative about carrying it over to SCO members, Shanghai Cooperation Organization
Let me focus
members.
once again on the inclusive government. We're going to talk about the anti-terror issue a bit later.
And
Mr.
Kyrgyzstan,
Barbish, you can still
they
hear
are
me.
members of Collective Security Treaty Organization.
Let me focus on the
created
government
by Russia
for now.
In the early 90s.
Maybe you have a difficulty hearing me.
We took upon ourselves the responsibility to protect these countries if their security is threatened. And that gives Russia the legal powers to use force, if necessary,
Mr.
to prevent
Barbish
any
in
terrorist
Russia so
activity
that he knows
threatening these countries.
the problems that we have with the audio. But Mr. Barbish, I don't know whether you can hear me now. Anyway, I heard your point, but we want to focus now on the inclusive government before we move on to the terrorism issue, because there's a lot of issues we could spread around our discussion without really focusing much on the result. Mr. Rong, I want to come back to you on that inclusive government. that is the thing that we really should talk about here. China, unlike the other two countries that are now represented in the panel discussion, in fact, did not have much history about Afghanistan, only being Afghanistan's neighbor. So there were no war between China and Afghanistan, no conflicts between China and any factions in Afghanistan. But there is one thing that China wants, it seems, peace along its border and no terrorism. So Mr. Rong, tell me more about how, within the SCO framework, will China be able to work with the others who have different kinds of history, different kinds of approaches through history on the issue of Afghanistan?
Well, I think the first and foremost is, of course, to work together to come up with a coordinated sort of approach or sort of an idea, way how to work with and live with, as a matter of fact, with the reality in Afghanistan, taking into account the importance of stability and security, and its possible spill over if there's instability and the civil war to the neighboring countries. So this is the most important. As we have seen, obviously, I think while the SCO member states share a lot of common grounds, there are still some differences in terms of how much we can do. So I think this summit and also the sideline meetings related to Afghanistan is very important to work out the differences, to make sure to send out a unified and message to the Taliban regime and also other political parties, and help them to work out the differences.
One of the things that we really talk about, also mentioned by the Chinese president at the SCO summit, is how to deal with that, the issue of terrorism. He used a lot of very strong and clear words. He said the Taliban and those in Afghanistan should relentlessly eradicate terrorism within its border and not let it have a spillover effect and harm the others. I understand that Mr. Barbish from Russia, now you could hear me well, unlike earlier. So now could you help me also to understand how to help and support Afghanistan, even this interim government, to make up their mind and, as all agreed upon, eradicate terrorism with the support of SCO?
Basically, President Putin's position and Russia's position is the same as the position of President Xi of China on this issue. We know how dangerous terrorism emanating from Afghanistan can be. Let me remind you that in the late 90s, when the early unreformed Taliban was in power in Afghanistan, there were many attacks on the former Soviet territory from Afghanistan. And the Russian bodyguards who stood on the border were often victims of these attacks. So, as our foreign minister Lavrov has said, it will all depend on the conduct of the new government in Kabul. If the new government in Kabul is serious about fighting terrorism, and if they ask for help from Russia or from our allies, we will provide that help. We are not novices in providing anti-terrorist help. Of course, it will not be a Russian army entering Afghanistan. We are not going to commit the same mistake which we made in 1979. And in Russia, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 is considered officially a mistake. We are not going to repeat the mistakes of Americans who wanted to remake Afghanistan in their own image. But, of course, we are interested in eradicating terrorism on the territory of Afghanistan. If the inclusive government in Kabul is indeed inclusive, and if they want to crack down on terrorist elements, they can get help from us. That was said very clearly by our diplomats.
Great, thank you so much. Professor Nalapat, also India's view, of course, there are different history in terms of India and Afghanistan and Taliban, but SCO, which India is a member of, one of its fundamental goals is to eradicate terrorism in the region and deal with that. Mr. Nalaphat.
Yes, I think the Prime Minister Modi made that very clear in his speech in this very important summit of top leaders, that terrorism is a very high priority for the Indian government, and extremism and radicalization has to be fought. The problem is that, number one, there are no women in the Taliban government. There are no moderates in the Taliban government. There are very few Tajiks or Uzbeks in the Taliban government, even though they're almost 40–45% of the population. And very importantly, several of the ministers in the Taliban government have a terror record. So I don't know if you can, one day wake up and be entirely different from what you were for the last 50–60 years of your life. I certainly hope that is possible, but I'm not sure it's going to happen.
Professor Rong, come back to you. That is a reasonable concern, what Professor Nalaphat just said about the earlier roots of links between the current Taliban and the issue of terrorism, even though the Taliban argued that the Americans were going against their words in their earlier quote-unquote peace deal with the Taliban, that they should eradicate, should take off some of the names they earlier agreed from the so-called terrorist list. But anyway, that's their argument. But Professor Rong, how is China likely to deal with that? Because some have been asking, Professor Rong, different countries in Afghanistan's neighbor are having different concerns and top priorities regarding which terrorist organization needs to be dealt with first. So will there be a consensus and concerted effort by SCO about that, Professor Rong?
Yeah, indeed. I think there's a consensus. There's a consensus that the Taliban should have a clean cut from all the international sort of terrorist organizations that has been designated by the UN, including in the case of China, ETIM, and others. And this has been, I think, very clear and loud, and I think the Taliban definitely received that message. And China made it very clear it is one of the sort of priority issues. And I would say it is the red line. And it could also be the sort of conditions for Taliban to win the recognition, diplomatic recognition, international recognition of the neighboring country and international community. I think that the Taliban knows very well. The question is that whether they have the capability and the willingness to have such kind of clear cut. And I think we are going to know very soon, because if there's if there's anything happened in Afghanistan, like terrorist attacks against the nationals of the neighboring countries or properties, and if the government of Taliban is able to deal with, and if there's some request for intelligence, communications or cooperation, if the Taliban is able to respond positively, that would tell the regional countries and the international community that they are serious about that. But again, we need to give some time, because they are just in power for 1 month, and definitely there are many things they have to work out among themselves. So this is
very
something.
true. That's a great point. Another thing I want to focus on is not just about the Afghanistan, but the SCO's role today. I mean, if you look at SCO, originally it was more an organization, regional one against the terrorism, and then it expanded its function also as well. And now we see the importance of regional organizations in a time when they're having more divides in the world. So I want to go to you, three of you gentlemen, about that. Particularly now, China and Russia, Mr. Barbish, seem to be quite hand in hand on many issues. How is China and Russia, you see their roles within SCO and transforming that organization too, Mr. Barbish?
Well, I think that Russia and China can play a very positive role, and they can set an example for many countries in the world how to be really tolerant to other states and other points of view. I mean, everyone understands that members of SCO, some members such as India and Pakistan, have differences. The new member, Iran, obviously is a very different country from Russia or from other countries, other members of the organization. I mean, we have Muslim countries inside this organization, we have Christian countries, we have China, but we all talk to each other, we all respect each other. And please note that when CSO has summit meetings or when CSTO has summit meeting, we never talk about foreign enemies. We never name a single other country an enemy. And this is in the preamble of Collective Security Treaty Organization. It doesn't view any other country as an enemy. We are protecting security, we are fighting terrorism, but we don't proclaim other countries enemies. That makes us very different from NATO and from some other organizations which openly proclaim Russia and China enemies. I mean, this is scandalous in the 21st century where we have, when we have such a fragile world and there are already so many conflicts, so many dangerous weapons. It's irresponsible to proclaim other countries' enemies.
I see. Mr. Nalapad, of course, India is a very interesting position. Indo-Pacific, that's proposed by the United States. Currently, New Delhi quite enthusiastic about that. But also, New Delhi is a member of the SCO. So it's politically interesting how India is walking that line.
Well, I'd like to say that India welcomes Iran becoming a part of the SCO. I think the Prime Minister referred to that in his own talk. India warmly welcomes Iran because India has very deep connection with Iran. As far as President Putin and Prime Minister Modi are concerned, they are very good friends. And just a few days ago, the Prime Minister spoke to Mr. Putin for nearly an hour, and they are in regular contact, especially about Afghanistan. I would like to say that this expansion of the SCO, tomorrow, Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Egypt are going to become members, can enable the SCO to play a positive role, not only in Central Asia, not only in Afghanistan, but even in the Middle East as well. The Saudis and the Iranians can, for example, talk to each other. India is a good friend of both and would like to see both be friendly to each other.
Okay. Professor Rong, 2 points. One is the SCO summit is being held at a time when US, Australia, the UK, for example, are trying to form some kind of interesting group purportedly against China. But also at the same time, you see the dramatic changes going on in the world and regional organizations, some becoming outstanding and some becoming extremely quiet. So how do you see, from these two different ways, how SCO is likely to function for China and for China's partners?
Indeed, I think that's exactly the SCO, the importance of SCO, and that I can make for the region and beyond. Because SCO, as the two previous speakers said, is a kind of pursue a different kind of a vision, different kind of way for regional cooperation. And the past 2 decades have shown that they are really working, even though as it entered the 3rd decade, there are more challenges, both in security, in economic development, and more importantly, I think with facing the pressure of the other regional blocs or new so-called alliances like the so-called ACRAS, which is again, I think kind of remind us, the legacy of the Cold War, zero-sum sort of a game mindset. But the most important thing for me is that as SCO becomes more important, SCO becomes enlarges, it would need more sort of work, more sense of solidarity, so that they can that they can make a difference. They are really relevant in addressing, in finding a way to addressing the challenges that the region that are facing. That is the most important thing.
It is the most important thing, and that seems to also the message that I got from the 3 of you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining this conversation and discussion. Rong Ying, Madhav Nalapat, Dmitry Barbish, really appreciate it. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Coming up, the end of China's first mission to its space station coincides with SpaceX's first all-civilian flight. Can China and the U.S. and others cooperate in space exploration? Is that a question mark? Do we have answers now? Next. Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. China announced September the 17th that its Shenzhou 12 manned space flight mission was a success. 3 Chinese taikonauts were safely picked up from the Shenzhou 12 re-entry capsule after a touchdown in Dongfeng landing site in northern China's Inner Mongolia region. All 3 are said to be in physically good shape. Look at them. The Shenzhou 12 crew helped build China's first space station, the Tiangong. They also set a new Chinese record for longest time spent in space at 90 days. While advances in manned space are accelerating, private spaceflight is taking off. On Thursday, for the first time in 60 years of human spaceflight, a rocket from SpaceX Inspiration 4 blasted into the orbit with no professional astronauts on board. Can space become the next frontier for global cooperation at this very interesting time? Will China's leap in space exploration lead to technical advances that benefit humanity? Let's find out. For more, joining me in our Beijing studio, Yang Yuguang, professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. What a pleasure to see you once again, Mr. Yang. Every time you come into our studio, there's always good news about China's space program. So tell me more about this trail, these 3 wonderful gentlemen, 90 days in the outer space. What does that really mean for China's space exploration?
It is really a great milestone for China Aerospace. You know that China wants to come from a big country to an advanced country in space field. There is a benchmark, is the construction, also the operation of the China space station. We've already mastered most of the technologies, but not all the technologies. So this mission will be the demonstration and the verification for the rest of critical technology. For instance, the EVA technology, the long-term duration of residence of human in space, and also the regenerative life support system. All these are very critical for us.
I can feel the excitement in your words. Even the speed of a speech is picking up at this moment. I mean, if you look at those 3 gentlemen, they are really seems to be in good shape after landed. That's quite amazing. But having said that, though, the 90 days, what exactly did they achieve?
Well, you may notice that during they performed 2 EVA, or actual vehicular activity, outside the station. You may remember that during the first EVA, when Mr. Liu Pengming came out of the hatch, he said, "Wow, the outside is so beautiful." He mentioned this because that he is in a very good condition. Right. That means that the design of the EVA spacesuit is very perfect. So it is possible for him to be very convenient and say these kind of sentences. And also, moreover, you see that during these 90 days, they not only performed the scientific research, but also made some preparation for the future construction of the station. For instance, they have mounted the research racks inside the station. The racks, the standard research rack for the microgravity environment, the space medicine, and also other scientific research.
Right. A lot of things are going on during those 90 days, and they also sending back to the Earth their video, shall I say, diary in a way. And, at the important occasions, they even send their greetings to those on Earth in a way. But having said that, though, we see coincides with it China's achievement, the U.S. achievement, particularly sending non-professional astronauts into the outer space. What does that mean? And how is China looking at the achievements made by the U.S. private sector now?
In fact, what you mentioned is Inspiration 4, already in space just the day before last. But that that although it is an all-civilian space mission, but that's Mr. Isaacman, the commander. He is a billionaire, and not he paid the money for himself, but also paid the money for the rest of 3 seats. So unfortunately, in the future, still it is the orbital space tourism is still a game for the billionaires, not for the common people. But in China, that the commercial space field is also developing very fast. So I think, technically speaking, it is possible for China also do the same kind of things in the future.
But you do see that kind of a competition apparently going on between China and the United States, quite clear. During 1 week, both sides have some big actions in terms of space exploration. And Mr. Yang, you've been working in the international space organizations of different natures. Tell me more about how do you see now at this stage with quite complicated geopolitics, by the way, competition, cooperation, which word are we closer to?
You know that I am a technician, and from the international space field, my friends and colleagues in international space field all says congratulations to us. And not only our technicians, but also the leaders, the managers, the administrators think that I also expressed to the media many times, no competition. Because you know that China is still a developing country, and it developed its own space program according to its own need to promote its high technologies to benefit the national economy and our daily life, not compete with other countries. Think of the space race. You know that there were a manned space launch every 2 or every 3 months, very, very frequently, but it's not the situation now. So you see that in China, some foreign friends said that China has a very slow but very steady progress. So our goal, perform our space programs step by step, not concerning the consideration or commands of other countries. So this is one hand, but on the other hand, we recognize the international cooperation as a very important part of our space program, and also think this is a benchmark for becoming an advanced country.
Thank you so much, Yang Yuguang, professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. Appreciate it, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Earlier, I also interviewed some other experts in the field who knew the best ideas on how China can reach its space dreams. In fact, there are different kinds of space dreams already China has in mind. Let's listen in.
今年我们将进入空间站的中国空间站的
This year, we are entering the launch phase of China's space station, which we also call the construction phase. Our major work is to build the space station. There will be 11 launches, 3 big launches including the core module, experimental module 1 and experimental module 2, and then to assemble them in space. The construction of the whole space station may be completed next year.
这样的话，在明年可能将完成整个空间站的建设。
That sounds amazing. I understand when China brings back the soil of the moon, we have been hearing intentions to cooperate from the U.S. side on that. So shall we understand that as long as China is making progress and big progress, there will be bigger opportunities for cooperation, even with the United States?
对，嫦娥5号采样返回以后，很多国家也提出来，要一起合作。实际上，我们
After the return of Chang'e 5, many countries want to work with us on the samples from the moon. China will do a study on the samples with other countries. Cooperation in space exploration is a policy in our country for a long time, and we will not change the principle.
这个原则可能还是不会变的。但是首先要满足，就是我们这个国家这个主要的一些研究任务吧。
But at first, we must meet the demand of main research tasks of our own. Meanwhile, there is an approval process for the lunar samples. The research plans proposed by each country can only be carried out after being recognized by experts and relevant departments.
那经过这个专家委员会的认定以后呢，就可以进行实施了。经过我们的部门相关管理部门。
I understand. Interesting. The other thing is about the Mars, the exploration of the Mars. Tianwen, how do you see its mission? How do you assess its performance?
我们的天文1号现在，按照我们中国的说法，就是还在路上。
Tianwen-1 is still on the way. Orbiting, landing, and inspecting are all 3 steps in one go, completing them in one progress, which is China's Mars exploration plan. It is different from those of the United States, Russia, and Europe. The Mars exploration of these countries are separated in different programs. Orbiting, landing, and inspecting, and even sampling return are carried out separately. We basically combine all steps, and Tianwen-1 can do those jobs.
美国包括其他国家的这个火星的探测。
The Mars exploration of the United States and other countries is very meaningful to us. The U.S. has accumulated rich experience in this area, and we can learn from it for our future study. Although there may be many differences in the details, I think the whole picture of their technical roots are very valuable for us.
但是这方面可能细节的可能还有一些问题，但是宏观的，我觉得他们走的一些技术路线对我们是非常有参考价值的。
The other thing is about China is working on the internet satellite and has been testing about it. Tell me more about that.
这个空间互联网和我们地面的这个互联网，应该说是功能和性能应该说是一样的。
The functions and performance of the spatial internet and the terrestrial internet are the same, just one in the sky and the other on the ground. The biggest advantage of spatial internet is that it can cover a wider area and can send interconnected information to any location in the world without relying on optical fibers. This is of great significance to the development of China's information industry. The dominance and autonomy of information is very important. We are now doing work to form our own spatial internet. The next step requires the overall planning and arrangement from the national level.
这个空间资源是有限的。
The amount of space resources is limited. Viewed from a global perspective, it may be better for countries to work together to build a joint space internet. But, due to various reasons, it is impossible to build just one network around the world now. But it is necessary for one country to build one network. As a large developing country, China has the responsibility to do this well and provide with better spatial information services.
我觉得我们也有责任把这方面事做好。
We see some very specific steps taken by China and the United States, for example, about the exploration of Mars. Almost every step of the way, in terms of public exposure, there is a apparent competition going on. So I really wondered, Mr. Xu, from your perspective, where is this competition leading us to?
Well, I think competition will bring the best out of each partners, and this is also true for the U.S. and it's true for China.
What's the best that the U.S. has already shown as a result of this? What is the best that China has shown as a result of this?
The cutting-edge technology that we have. For example, we do not have communications beyond the moon before. Any communication beyond that distance is innovative for China. And also for Mars missions, the lander and the rover on itself, the sky crane that they call it, has all the control technologies. And once landed, the power system that is using radioactive isotope to heat up the battery every night and rove during the day, and using all the sophisticated equipments on board the rover, as well as to collect the samples and locate those samples, maybe return them back to Earth in the future. These are unprecedented for the human resource and human beings. And I always say that we will become an interplanetary species once we live on another planet. So Mars could be the first step to do that revolution. So for revolutions, you need innovation, you need new ideas, and you need cutting-edge technologies. All of this will be combined during the competition process and during the cooperation process. Once we all have these capabilities of going that same destination, we will naturally combine our efforts.
Interesting when you say we will naturally combine our efforts. Is it really going to be natural?
It is politically difficult, but we are evolving. We are having new innovative ideas and pragmatic approaches. With different political scenarios, there will be mergers and cooperations in the whole course of competitions. Competition can exist on Earth, but outer space, we should all have cooperations. This is true for the International Space Station, where all nations working and living in the same confined spaces. But for exploration of interplanetary missions, efforts should be combined.
So where is China? Still my question. You know, if there is something like a few mountains, where is China? Where's the United States? Where's Japan? Where's India? Some of your other members? How would you help us to paint that picture?
There are many ways of evaluating a country's space capabilities. One of them is the number of launches. Former Soviet Union, US had more than 1,000 launches already. But China is in the 200 and 300 category. However, China is rapidly growing. For example, last year we had 39 launches, but I always say 40 launches because there is one launch from the lunar surface back to the lunar orbit by the Chang'e 5. That is another launch. Right. So it's 40 launches last year, #1 in the world. And this year we're expecting about the same categories and same number. So the number of launches means that we have a very robust and ambitious space project. Along with the economy growing, I believe that we're catching up very quickly. So first the number of, in terms of in-orbit facilities and infrastructures, we say number of satellites operational in orbit. US has more than 500, China more than 200. So the others are smaller numbers, around 100 and lower. So in terms of launching capabilities, launching frequencies, satellite operating numbers and infrastructures, I would say China in space sector is very good in #2 and #3 position. But subtleties in particular areas of space technology, maybe we're a little bit behind, but scale-wise, we're quite robust.
My conversation earlier with space experts. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.